Hello, Euro squatters. Today we will see the convalescence of the French Revolution, or the third phase of the French Revolution, as it is declining from the Reign of Terror into the Thermidorian reaction, the Directory, and the rise of Napoleon. So first, let's take a look at a little video about how Robespierre is going to get himself shaved by the revolutionary razor.
With the blood of the Terror, Maximilien Robespierre has rescued the revolution. An invigorated army is repelling attacks at the border, and internal dissent has been all but quashed. At the height of his success, Robespierre dreams up a loftier goal yet: to use more terror to mold a new kind of society, a republic of virtue.
By virtue, he means civic virtue. It's an active principle for Robespierre. For example, you cannot be a virtuous citizen by simply obeying the laws and keeping your head down. You must actively be involved in the work of the state, and that includes for Robespierre destroying the enemies of the state.
On February 5th, 1794, Robespierre gives a speech outlining his philosophy.
Terror without virtue is disastrous. But virtue without terror is powerless.
He associates terror with virtue. Terror at that moment becomes in his thinking an instrument by which you create virtue.
But others disagree. For Danton, the revolution is heading down the wrong path. He and his followers, the Dantonists, believe it is time to bring the Terror to a halt. It has served its purpose and is in danger of feeding the revolutionaries into their own fire.
By the spring of 1794, things are beginning to go better. The food situation is no longer so bad, and the war effort is going better, and Danton is basically saying we need to get a new footing for the government. We need to move to a kind of normalization. Robespierre believes it's too soon. Danton will start organizing a group to argue that we should end the terror. Robespierre will see this as a direct threat to the government. He will not see it as just a difference of opinion about the direction of policy. He will see it as potential treason.
And in Robespierre's Republic of Virtue, there is only one response to treason. The Dantonists are rounded up and quickly sentenced to death. Robespierre has sent thousands to the scaffold, but is uneasy with the blood of execution. He will not attend the beheadings of his former friends and allies. As he steps up to the blade, Danton shouts,
"My only regret is that I'm going before that rat, Robespierre."
With the Dantonists out of the way, Robespierre launches France into an even bloodier, more horrifying period: the Great Terror.
The Great Terror is the name given to the last phase of the Terror in the spring of 1794 into the summer of 1794. It's the period at which the tempo of executions really starts to increase, at which the atmosphere of paranoia, particularly in Paris, but really across the country, starts to increase exponentially. You can track the number of executions until it's up to almost 800 per month in Paris, towards the end even more.
Paris's executioner is busier than ever. But on June 6, 1794, the roll of the carts comes to a halt. The guillotine hangs silent. Robespierre has declared a new religious holiday: the Festival of the Supreme Being. He wants to replace the old Catholic god with a new one: the goddess of reason.
One thing about Robespierre is that he never supported these atheist policies. He believed that people needed a divinity to believe in. And he helped sponsor this cult that was called the Cult of the Supreme Being, with this extraordinary tableau in Paris in, I believe it was June of 1794, which had choirs of people dressed in white singing. You had this kind of papier-mâché mountain that was built in the center of Paris. And then at the critical moment of the ceremony, you had Robespierre himself sort of emerging on the top of this mountain, clad in a toga, and marching down. And I think at this moment, a lot of people felt, all right, who does he really think he is? Does he think he's God here? Does he think he's the king?
As the Great Terror spirals on, Robespierre's colleagues see the Festival of the Supreme Being as his departure from the realm of reality.
There are those who think that Robespierre really has reached so extreme and so unreasonable a position that they can't turn back, that his fanaticism has somehow overtaken him, and there are those who think he's just gone nuts.
Once again, Robespierre's suspicions turn to those closest at hand. On June 27th, now the 9th of Thermidor, he appears before the convention and delivers a speech of threats. It is the last speech he will ever give.
Robespierre makes a tactical error. He comes in and announces that he has a new list of enemies of the Republic, but he won't give the list. Therefore, everyone is afraid they might be on the list, and when he comes back the next day to give the list, he is arrested before he can speak.
An unexpected chorus of voices shouts Robespierre down. He is stunned into silence. The deputies declare him an outlaw and immediately remove him from the convention. Robespierre and several of his associates are taken to City Hall, where they remain under watch for the night. Shots ring out in the early morning. Guards race to the second floor. They fling the doors open to a grisly scene. One of Robespierre's allies has thrown himself from the window. Another has taken a pistol to his head. And Robespierre is found semi-conscious with a bullet wound to the face, his jaw shattered from an apparent suicide attempt. Robespierre spends his last hours on the table of the Committee of Public Safety, in the very room where he had piloted the terror to its hideously bloody peak. As he is ridiculed and insulted by his former colleagues, Robespierre is unable to respond. The Grand Master of Oratory has been silenced. In the conciergerie, where the last Queen of France had preceded him, Robespierre is prepared for the national razor. His cellmate, the revolutionary Saint-Just, points to a painting of the rights of man and declares, "At least we did that."
So Robespierre is going to be getting himself into trouble because, as you see from the cartoon, first of all, on the right-hand side, there is a demonstration by British political cartoonists about how effective the Reign of Terror is. Sure, it removes crowns, sure, it removes heads, but it also removes the church. It removes the heads even of its most passionate followers, the sans-culottes. And so we see the end of the world, essentially. They're going for the end of the world with this Reign of Terror. And one man who protested it by the spring of '94 was Danton. So Danton and the Dantonists are very much opposed to Robespierre. Danton is earthy and all too human. His carnality, his profanity, his arrogance, his venality, they're all opposed to what people see in Robespierre as this cold-blooded, sexless, incorruptible man. And so Danton is also starting to see things much differently because he's far-seeing in his revolution. He's seeing that revolutionary France needs to start to fit back into the world rather than focusing on this stupid, bloodthirsty quest for virtue as Robespierre wanted. And so it's time for us to start to slow down the revolution, or slow down the terror, certainly, at least. However, Robespierre doesn't want to see that, and so he is going to send Danton, his former friend, and the Dantonists to their deaths. Now, as Danton is going to his death in April of 1794, he's going to be strutting, jesting, boastful to the very end. As he walks up to the scaffold, he's going to prophesy to the crowd, accurately, I might add, that Robespierre is imminent in his demise, that he too will follow Danton to the scaffold and have his head cut off by the guillotine as well. And in his last words to the executioner, the headsman, as he's preparing him to put him into the guillotine, he said to the headsman, "Show my head to the people. It will be well worth seeing." Oh, a joker all the way to the end. So, meanwhile, Robespierre is going to pursue his efforts with the Great Terror, and we're going to see the deaths of thousands of people just in the matter of this spring. There's going to be hundreds of people per day going to the guillotine in the streets of Paris. And so in the midst of this, as you saw, Robespierre is going to end up calling off things for a little while in order to celebrate the cult of the Supreme Being and have a festival of the cult of the Supreme Being. And people are starting to realize it's just getting weird. He's getting far too out there. His whole Enlightenment principles gone far too far at this point. Yes, far too far. All right, and so on 9 Thermidor, there's going to be a conspiracy hatched against the dictatorial Maximilien Robespierre. He's going to go before the National Convention with another list of names of conspirators and counter-revolutionaries, and the people within the National Convention who know that their names are probably going to either be on the list now or will end up on that list, they're going to shout him down and finally silence the seemingly unsilenceable incorruptible. They're going to arrest him. They're going to put him in prison after he will try to commit suicide, blowing his jaw right off. And then, remember, as he's looking at the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, his friend in his jail cell will say, well, at least we made that. Well, all right, whatever. Either way, now we're starting to see that people are reacting against the revolution. At this point, we have a little thing called the Thermidorian reaction, because these guys want to relieve some of the economic controls that had been taking place during the Reign of Terror. And so the middle class especially want to reassert their authority, because they're the ones that are suffering the most under price controls, like the law of maximum. They're also starting to be very, very scared of things like the law of suspects, justifiably. So the National Convention is going to vote to abolish all price controls. They're going to start printing more money, which is going to lead to problems because we'll have rampant inflation. Therefore, prices will soar. Therefore, the sans-culottes are absolutely pissed, and they will very soon be taking to the streets. Meanwhile, they're also going to start to restrict the power of political organizations and reassert censorship in the press, which totally goes against all the principles of the Enlightenment-backed French Revolution. And so there's also going to be a little thing called the White Terror. So it's a reverse terror of what the Jacobins were doing during 1793 to 94. Now it's a white terror against the Jacobins throughout the countryside in particular, but also in Paris. All right, and so there's going to be some significant problems, violent upheaval in 1795. First of all, the sans-culottes in the spring of 1795, after a year of not having their guarantee of daily bread, they're absolutely livid about that. And as you recall, throughout this revolution, anytime the urban, unwashed masses, the fecal-stained masses of the sans-culottes have taken to the street, they always get things done. They're always successful. Something always changes when they take to the streets violently. But not this time. They will be crushed mercilessly by the National Convention that will send out the National Guard to prevent the overthrow of the National Convention, or to prevent the sans-culottes from using violence to intimidate them. And then, on top of that, a few months later, in October of 1795, we're going to have on 13 Vendémiaire a royalist uprising, a coup led by a bunch of dirty royalists who want to try and overthrow the National Convention and reassert a conservative constitution and bring back a constitutional monarch. And who will we call in to stop all of this? Who will be called in to end this royalist uprising? None other than the Lieutenant Napoleon Bonaparte. So we'll get more background on him in a minute, but let's see what he does to put down this royalist uprising.
This is the area that concerns me most. The Rue Saint-Honoré and the Palais Égalité. If the rebels descend on us from Saint-Roch...
Another good reason to act. Believe me, Barras. We cannot let a simple riot...
A simple riot? Is that what you call 25,000 royalists storming the assembly to seize the deputies and destroy the republic?
What forces do you have?
Your name again?
General Bonaparte, currently without a command.
No, Bonaparte. Artillery, wasn't it? Right then. We have 4,000 men from the camp at Sablon under General Menou. 4,000 against 25,000.
No cannons?
General Menou left them in Sablon with the excuse that they would slow him down.
We need that artillery. Tell squadron leader Murat to retrieve those cannons. He's a human tidal wave. Nothing can stand in his way. At the moment, we have the artillery. We will position it like this. One battery here, another one here, another one on this bridge in line, and another one here.
If the cannons come through, you'll take command of them.
I warn you, citizen, that I follow a pledge. To its end or mine. Don't ask me to answer for any blood that's shed. If I draw my sword, It will remain drowned until the order of the Republic is restored.
What is the date?
It's midnight, so it's now the 13th of Vendémiaire.
Your appointment as Chief of Staff. It's up to you now.
Take your position.
Follow me, men!
Position! Aim! Fire! Left forward! Body shot, fire! Grenadier! Fire! Fire!
Second row! Hey! Fire! It's a slaughterhouse.
No, Murat, it's a battlefield. This is war.
War? In the streets of Paris against Frenchmen?
Against royalists, who are in league with the enemies of the nation. There are 40 English vessels off the coast of Brest, and 40,000 Austrians at the gates of Strasbourg. They are waiting for the Republic to be overthrown. They are waiting to invade France. It will not happen. I'm general of the Republic, and I will not let it.
So as you heard from the video there at the end, Napoleon Bonaparte will do anything to make sure that no one opposes the state. He will fight to defend the state. All right, so Napoleon makes a name for himself there. We'll see more on him in just a second. But continuing on with the Thermidorian reaction, there is going to be a return of religion at this time because part of the convalescence, for those of you that remember Crane Britton's thesis, is that after the Reign of Terror gets things all kinds of crazy and disrupts the entire social, political, and economic and religious, often, fabric of the nation, pretty soon in the convalescence, they want to see the return of strongman rule, and the people want the return of their conservative ways, their religion in particular. And so Catholic women in the provinces will start to bring this back quietly at first, but pretty soon those refractory priests that were seen as counter-revolutionaries and being killed in droves are going to, those guys are dead obviously, but the other ones that were not killed are going to start to come back and reassert that Catholicism and take over those revolutionary shrines that had been set up and reassert Catholicism instead. All right, and so a new constitution is going to come into place in 1795 as well, and it's fairly conservative, especially considering what we've seen before. In the previous constitution under the Republic in 1792, we saw a system in which voting was guaranteed for universal male suffrage. All white men in France were able to vote, even the unwashed masses of the sans-culottes. Now it's only men of substantial means, so they're limiting this to landowners, to propertied members, to business owners, and upper middle class, which is, you know, going along with, at least to some extent, Lockean ideals, though that those that are putting in on the state and paying its taxes, those are the ones that deserve to have a stake in society. And so they're also going to set up a constitutional oligarchy, because we have a 5-man directory, kind of similar to the Committee of Public Safety, but instead of 12 men, it's 5. And instead of having a dictator run the whole show, Maximilien Robespierre, we're going to have these 5 men making all the major decisions with a legislative assembly that's going to help guide policy. Well, we'll see if they do very well at it, because in the elections of 1797, people want peace at any price. They're absolutely sick and tired of the revolution that they've been seeing, the liberalism, all of the problems that have been caused by international war, terror, and civil war. They're ready for an end of this. And the Brits are making a pretty accurate portrayal here in this political cartoon as well, because the Frenchmen always talked about how now that we've had the revolution, we are free of the slavery of the monarchy, free, unlike the Brits, who are enslaved by their monarchs. And so you can see the difference here. The woman on the left is the sans-culotte, starving and eating turnips and carrots, whereas we've got the man on the right, the Brit, who is enslaved and feasting happily. All right, so you can see that the people are ready. They're ready to end this thing. They're picking up on some of these things and saying, you know what, maybe it's time for us to call an end to the war at least, if not call an end to the revolution as well. But the Directory will end up nullifying those elections and using dictatorial methods like censorship again and saying, yeah, you voted for it, but we're going to pretend you didn't. How's that sound? Well, there was a group of revolutionaries called the Revisionists. Now, the revisionist revolutionaries were people that wanted to guarantee that we had this constitutional oligarchy, that we essentially had similar to the Roman Republic where we had a consulate. They wanted to have something similar, but they knew they needed the power of the army to do it. They needed a general who could run the show, someone who is dauntless, intrepid, patriotic, and strong enough in order to try and put down the masses when necessary in order to keep political stability. Now, who could that be? None other than Napoleon. So, Napoleon Bonaparte, a little bit of background on him. First of all, he's the perfect opportunist in a time of open opportunities. So he really had no cause, except for that of grasping what the revolution would give him. In an age of idealism and blacks and whites, he was neither a royalist nor a democrat, neither an aristocrat nor a commoner. He had no religion, because at the age of 9, a teacher told him that his hero, Caesar, was probably burning in hell. And so he abandoned his Catholic faith as a result. Now, I'm certainly not going to abandon my faith, but let's just put it this way. I'm quite confident as well that in the event that I don't make it to heaven, at least I'll get to meet Napoleon. Right? Okay, so there's some benefit there, I guess. So his sole aim, though, Napoleon's sole aim was power. Therefore, he could combine the idealism of 1789 with the authority and militarism of an enlightened despot. That will be the man that we see developing here. So he became a dedicated patriot and revolutionary during the start of the French Revolution, and actually he engaged in a revolution of his own even before the French Revolution really started to take off, because if you're wondering, if I can tell you where Napoleon is from, Corsican. Bad pun. Yeah, he was from Corsica. All right, so he was fighting for Corsican independence as the French Revolution was just starting to take off as well, and gained Corsican independence, appealed to the French in order to make Corsica part of France, and as they did, no longer a part of Italy now. And then he, as a lower-ranking nobleman, knew that he had to work his way up the system. Things weren't looking so hot for him, not very good prospects. He was dirt poor, even though he's a nobleman in Corsica, so he decided to leave Corsica and go to France and fight in the French artillery, and became a lieutenant in the French artillery as a result. So then as he's moving his way up the ranks, he's going to become a national hero because of the Italian campaign. You see, what happened is the Directory was trying to figure out how to combat against the Prussians and the Habsburg forces that were bulging on France's eastern border. And so they were about to attack them there, but Napoleon convinced them instead they should attack in Italy, the weak underbelly, so to speak, of the coalition forces. And so as he went into Italy, the Austrians sent a bunch of forces down into Italy to try and stop him. And as he was sending his men across a bridge, the Austrians were on the other side of this wooden bridge over a very fast-moving river. And so he decided to lead his men by gloriously grabbing a flag and charging across the bridge at the front of the French lines, following with his tricolore flying glorious gloriously through the air. And as he was running, men were getting shot all around him, and the bridge ended up getting hit by a cannon fire and exploded into all these thousands of pieces as bodies were thrown from the bridge and falling into the river and floating away into oblivion. And yet, he stood strong. And so even though the attack was not a success, he ended up gloriously retreating. But even though it was not a success, people saw that, and heard that story, and they were like, whoa, who is this little man? I mean, he's 5'2", right? He's 5'2" in height. But while he's short in stature, he was a juggernaut in his ambition and his bravery. And so, someone who certainly noticed that was a lady by the name of Josephine. So Josephine had kind of a rough life because she was married to a French nobleman who didn't like her. His name was Alexander. They didn't like each other at all. They lived separate lives for the most part during the majority of their marriage, even though they had 2 children together. But during the terror that was sweeping through France, like many other noblemen, Alexander is going to be prosecuted, confined to a prison, and then executed by the guillotine. Now, Josephine was also scheduled to be executed. She was convicted of being a royalist, and she was going to be sent to the guillotine. But luck, sheer luck, helped her to escape death, because Robespierre was overthrown the day before her execution arrived, and thus the terror was over. But life after the revolution was difficult for women of her former status in society, especially being a convict. And so Josephine and her 2 children had to fight to survive. And so what she ended up doing is becoming a mistress to men of power in the National Convention, including President Barrère, who Napoleon actually just had talked to earlier in that video clip that we saw. And so it was during this time that she ended up meeting Napoleon through her lover, Barrère. All right, now, Napoleon at this point was a major general in the French army. He was a man, as we've seen, with lofty ambition, but he knew in order to achieve his goals, he needed a rich wife. And Josephine had the money and the looks. She was a bit of a saucy little minx, so even though she put him off at first, he started to intoxicate her with his love and his prose. Here is a quote from one of his love letters to her, written in December of 1795. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "I awake full of you. Your image and the memory of your intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses. Sweet, incomparable Josephine, what a strange effect you have had on my heart. Are you angry? Do I see you sad? Are you worried? My soul breaks with grief, and there is no rest for your lover. But how much the more when I yield to this passion that rules me and drink a burning flame from your lips and your heart. Oh, this night has shown me that your portrait is not you. You leave at midday. In 3 hours, I hope I shall see you. Meanwhile, my sweet love, 1,000 kisses, but do not give me any, for they set my blood on fire." Ooh, talk about a heated little love affair there, right? Heated and little, because he's 5'2". Yes. All right. So amidst this burgeoning love affair, Napoleon is going to get himself caught in an Egyptian quagmire. You see, there's a problem brewing for the French. So as we indicated, Napoleon's early military successes he saw by first holding off the coalition forces that were on the eastern side of France. And so that was working for a while, but he tells them that the new strategy should be to continue to invade through Italy. So let's make ourselves a big deal here by crushing the Austrian forces in Italy. So eventually, by early 1796, he will be successful in that campaign in Italy. But then he also says that, hey, we're fighting against the Brits, and we need to make sure that we can dominate the Brits as well. So first what I'm going to do is while I'm in Italy, I'm going to write a new constitution for Italy, and I will declare myself protector of Italy. All right, so that, as you can imagine, kind of ticked off the National Convention as he is just making himself the newly appointed regent, so to speak, of Italy. The Directory at this point was kind of like, well, wait a second, buddy. Isn't that supposed to be our job? But you can't stop Napoleon and his ambition. And so he's going to cruise through Italy and then at that point start to go down into Egypt. Now, Egypt is owned by the Brits. And therefore, the Brits are going to try and stop him. And so they're going to send in a man by the name of Horatio Lord Nelson to try and stop the French from getting to Egypt. But they will be successful in evading his fleet and making it into the Egyptian territory. In the midst, he's going to subdue the Knights of Malta, another cool little thing that is going to make him look pretty cool to the French people. All of this has incredible propaganda value because he's sending messages back to France saying, look what your general is doing. He has built up a new Italian constitution based on the French model. He has evaded the British forces and now subdued the Knights of Malta, as if you could get any cooler. But then he's going to go and fight at the Battle of the Pyramids, and in this battle he's going to completely dominate the Egyptians, who are totally unmatched. 29 Frenchmen compared to 11,000 Egyptians who will perish in this glorious battle, for the Frenchmen anyway, glorious for them. And then another thing that they're going to do after the Battle of the Pyramids is they will end up stealing the Rosetta Stone. So thank you for that, Napoleon, because now we're able to translate things like the Epic of Gilgamesh and other things. All right, but it's going to turn into a quagmire very quickly, in which Napoleon will have a very difficult time trying to escape. Now, the reason is because while he's massacring the Egyptians, Nelson, being the smart man that he is going to take his fleet from the Rock of Gibraltar and surround Napoleon's fleet and destroy it, completely destroy it. And then, while Napoleon's men are stranded in Egypt, they're going to be affected by plague. So as the plague is killing off their men, they're going to decide, all right, well, we got to find a way to get what we need, and we should take it from the Egyptians. We should live off the land. But the problem is they don't want us to. So we're going to massacre them. So Napoleon will commit his first of many war crimes by massacring 4,000 innocent people, men, women, and children, non-combatants for the most part, in order to steal what they need in order to pillage the land and keep the army fed. Now, Napoleon is not loving it there in Egypt anymore, and so he's going to hop a ride all the way back to France when no one's looking and leave his army to flounder and die in Egypt on their own. Not cool. But guess what? He gets back just in time before anybody else hears about it, and he wields the press to make it look like he is the hero of the day. When everyone says, hey, where was the army? He says, oh, they're still fighting in Egypt. Not dying, still fighting in Egypt. Winning. All right, so great propaganda value for him. So he is going to stage a conspiracy against the Directory. Now, we can see at this time a lot of fading idealism from what we saw in 1789, because here we have Emmanuel Saillet, the man, myth, and legend who wrote, What is the Third Estate? So in 1789, Emmanuel Saillet tells us, what is the Third Estate? It's everything. And they need the rights of man and citizen. They need the changes of that only Enlightenment idealism can provide, that we need to equalize this system in order to make it beneficial to all citizens, not just the nobility and the clergy. But by 1799, his tune has changed. His motto is confidence from below, authority from above. He's saying, yo, it's been rough up in here, dog. The revolution's been killing a lot of homies. I've kind of lost my flair for it. Now I just need someone who can run the show, since the Directory can't seem to do it very well. Nobody likes the Directory at this point. And so on 18 Brumaire, which is November the 9th on the regular calendar, not the weird French Revolutionary one, Napoleon is going to take the Legislative Assembly and the Directory at bayonet point, charging in with his army, and he is going to declare himself first consul in the Roman fashion. And then, by December of 1799, they're going to bring in a new constitution, a conservative constitution that solidifies his authority as first consul. Now let's see a little video.
1795. Paris is reeling from 3 years of bloody turmoil in the wake of the French Revolution. A young officer from a small Mediterranean island is about to make his first bid to seize power. His reign would capture the imagination of the French people and launch him onto the world stage as one of the greatest conquerors in history. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon was a force of nature. Audacity was his middle name. Napoleon imposed himself upon Europe with such force that he goes down in the annals with Caesar and few others.
Napoleon's rise was lightning fast. From the head of the Army of the Interior to commander-in-chief of the forces in Italy in just 1 year.
In 1796, Austria attacked French troops in Italy. and Napoleon took a disaffected and undernourished army and turned it into a veritable force. He beat Austria in battle after battle, eating up most of northern Italy, finally even bringing that serene Republic of Venice to its knees. When Napoleon returned to Paris, he was a star, and then he started to take over. But believe me, after 10 years of the blood and guts of the French Revolution, the people of Paris and France were ready to say, "Praise the Lord." In 1804, Napoleon was crowned Emperor at Notre Dame. It is said there's a preparatory drawing of Jacques-Louis David of the event where Napoleon's taking the crown from the Pope and crowning himself. He also turned to his brother and said, "If Daddy could only see us now."
So as you can see from the video, there was good reason to want a figure like Napoleon. There was good reason to want someone who could reestablish authority, solidity, and honestly, try and bring domestic peace. All right, there's been so much heated revolution up to this point and so much international war that it's time to have someone that can win wars and keep the peace domestically. Well, Napoleon will, to some extent achieve that as time goes on here, but it's going to be strained and struggling and difficult. So we're going to skip some of his wars for a minute. We'll get to that later. But first, let's take a look at the Code Napoleon, what he's going to do in his domestic policy. So in the Civil Code, or the Code Napoleon, as they called it in 1804, which, by the way, is still the basis of many French laws today, which should give you an indication that it's a pretty good deal, even though not all of it's good. Some of it is anyway. So he's going to guarantee the equality of all male citizens. Boom! 1789. What's up? All right, next one. Absolute security of wealth and private property. Boom! Middle class is happy because, hey, they were having a hard time in the Reign of Terror. Boom! Peasants are happy too because all that land they got during the Great Fear and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, the new Constitution of 1791, the first, they're going to be super happy about it. Booyah! Next one, Bank of France. Boom! It can help stabilize the currency and make sure that we are going to be prosperous. The next one, he's going to reconfirm the gains of the peasants and the middle class. Boom and boom! Just covered that. All right, next thing, he's going to centralize the bureaucracy of France. Boom! That's right. So this is a good one because before we had all these difficulties with the constant election processes. We had an election every couple years in which brand new members were being elected into the National Convention or the Legislative Assembly, previously the National Assembly. All of these different assemblies that just can't seem to have any cohesiveness, and it kept getting more and more radical until it got out of control. So he's going to centralize the bureaucracy in order to make his boys the ones that are a part of the bureaucracy. So that he's going to have a system of power in which if you are good at the military and you are one of his favorites, you move up the ranks bureaucratically as well as militarily. And so he's able to run the show dictatorially, you could say, or you could argue as an enlightened monarch, an enlightened despot, which isn't what the revolution's about. But then again, he's also bringing back the church. So Concordat of 1801, what this is going to do is make it so that Pope Pius the Seventh is much happier because now Catholicism has been returned to France. Boom! Conservatives love that one. Oh, but we're not going to go too far. You're still going to have some separation of church and state, sort of, because in France now, Napoleon's going to use something that has actually been happening on and off in French history all the way since the Concordat of Bologna back in the 1500s, early 1516 to be exact. And France now is going to have the ability to nominate bishops and pay the clergy. Now, the Pope's not thrilled about it, but it's better than nothing. At least Catholicism is being guaranteed as a right to exist in France once again. And so the reason that Napoleon is doing this is because he wants those priests and bishops as his moral prefects. He wants them in order to help establish his order, and they are dependent upon his happiness as well as his pay. All right? And so the costs of order, though, the not booms, the not exciting things here. All right, first of all, he's going to be not so nice to the ladies. He's going to reestablish the patriarchy in full. During the Reign of Terror, we saw that women, especially the sans-culotte women, were having much greater authority. They couldn't vote or anything, but it looked as though we were starting to get closer and closer to that idealism, modern idealism of equality of the sexes, or at least getting closer anyway, right? Overthrowing some of that patriarchy. Well, that's not going to last because now we're reestablishing the family monarch. He's saying that women have their place as breeders and as teachers of the children, and that's it. All right, another thing that he's going to do is make it so that the press is an organ of his propaganda, and so there will be absolute censorship. Only the newspapers that publish the right things about him will be allowed to exist. The rest will be shut down, or they will be prosecuted. by a guy by the name of Joseph Fauch. So Joseph Fauch is the head of the secret state police that's existing here, and they're going to do things like put you in prison, put you under house arrest, or put you in insane asylums and potentially lobotomize you. So the big question is Napoleon a child or betrayer of the revolution? This is something we're going to debate in class next week, but as you take a look at this picture here of Napoleon, propaganda by the way, you see Napoleon with his Code Napoleon, looking legit in his military uniform. He's ensconced in the French tricolor that's resting upon his leg. He's surrounded by the gods that are apotheosizing him, bringing him up to heaven. And so he is seen as a hero. Now, by the way, the French, again, still use the Code Napoleon as part of their laws today. So, child, betrayer, that's up to you to decide in our next debate. Thanks for watching.